Okay, in this video, what I want to do is I want to configure my web server. I logged into the web interface and I use a Mac, so I need to use the web interface to get this going. If you've got a PC, probably install the vSphere client on your machine. That's fine. I'm not going to explain that every video, but just so you know, I did log into the vSphere web client. You can do that if you're on the PC, but it's probably easier just to use the standalone client. So I'm just going to power on my server. So I'm going to start up my web server. And then what I want to do is I just want to launch my web server. So on the web client, it's a little bit different. So I'm going to open it. So in the real world, you may be using a hosting company like GoDaddy. You may be, having a server on premise that's being hosted. Typically, PHP shops use Linux servers. So basically, we've got a Ubuntu set up here. This is going to be what we're going to use this semester. And we're just going to go through and we're going to install some things right on the Ubuntu machine. I did put on the desktop a setup guide. So that way you can use this as well, which to be honest with you makes things really, really easy. But I'm going to go through it and I'm just going to talk about it as we go. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to be using the apt-get. That's the apt-get installer. So I need to open up a terminal. So this is kind of like the Ubuntu start button. Terminal's right here. You can type in TER and then it would pop in as well. So it's just a filter. So I'm just going to open up terminal. And then the first thing I need to do is I need to update apt-get. So I'm just going to type in sudo, S-U-D-O. So basically that means super user do. So we're currently running as a limited user, so we don't have the access to do certain things, like write to certain directories and run certain commands. So we're just kind of like a guest user. Sudo is going to basically escalate our permissions to allow us to do things that an admin would do. So that's why we type sudo before we install anything. And we're going to be installing a lot of stuff, so we're going to be typing sudo quite a bit. apt-get, G-E-T, is the tool that we're going to use. This tool basically helps us install things. And we're just going to run an update. So in the Windows world, so password is password. In the Windows world, what happens is we go to a website, we download the software we want, and then we double click on it and we run the installer, and then we install the software on our machine. That's the way it normally goes. Linux is a little bit different. In the early days, it was very, very painful to install things. But then apt-get came around and it became easier. So you used to have to actually compile it, and when you compiled it, it would have dependency issues. One thing was dependent on another thing. So in order to get around that, somebody created basically online archives and put all of the links to the software you need into these archives that apt-get referenced. So what we're doing is we're basically updating all of the links to all of the different repositories that are holding different source code. So that's really what the update's doing. So the next thing I want to do is I want to install Apache. All right, so it's sudo apt-get install Apache 2. Apache is a web server. So like right now, if I go to my web browser and I type in either localhost or 127.0.0.1, both of them point to the current machine. So if I run localhost, nothing's there because we don't have a web server running. So notice how up here, if I hover there, I can actually minimize this, and then that slides down over here somewhere. So there. So what I want to do is I want to install Apache. Apache is just a web server. That's all it is. So it's going to be sudo, because we're going to install something, apt-get, there's a hyphen, apt-get install, and then Apache 2. All right, so that's going to be our web server. So if I hit enter, it's going to basically say, hey, if you want to install this, here are all of the dependencies that need to be installed as well to get this going. So I'm going to say yes, install all the dependencies. It gets really easy at this point, even for updating and upgrading software. You can do it all from one command line, and it really makes it easy instead of having to go to each individual website, if you're using, OpenSSH, or if you're using like War FTP, or you can install Apache on a Windows machine, but you have to go to apache.org, download it, install it. This is just a little bit better. Okay, so now at this point, if I refresh this, Apache is now installed. Okay, so we've got basically a file that exists, and it exists in our var www.html folder. So this file is just being read. That's all a web server does. Grabs a text file, displays it on a web page, and it has markup inside of it, HTML. You guys know how that works. So that's all a web server is. So what we're going to do is we're going to extend the functionality of the web server, and we're going to install PHP 5. So PHP basically will give us the ability to actually write server-side code, and that's what we're going to do this semester. So I can hit the up arrow from the terminal. Right here, my black screen is my terminal. If I hit my up arrow, it'll type in the last thing that I typed. If I hit the up arrow again, it'll be the thing before that. So I'm going to hit the down arrow. That's the last thing I typed. So instead of installing Apache 2, I'm going to install PHP 5 and hit enter. And same thing with dependencies. There's different libraries that are required. I'm just going to say yes. And then it's going to install all of the dependencies in the correct order just to get everything working correctly. So by the time we're done with this exercise, we should be able to see PHP running. So the next thing we're going to do, we installed PHP 5, is we're going to install the MySQL server. All right, so that's our database server. So we're going to have a database server. So I'm going to hit the up arrow, and I'm just going to type in MySQL-server and hit enter. I'm going to say yes. So that's going to be our database. So we're going to have our database and our web server all on this machine. Now the password we're going to be using is going to be dev123. And then I'm going to hit enter. If you click here, it's not going to work. You have to actually tab because it's a terminal, it's a command line. So I typed in dev123, DEV123, and you can hit tab and enter, or you can just hit enter. So as we work through the semester, we're going to need to store things into databases, and we're going to be using the database more with our web server. Sometimes they're on the same machine, like here. Sometimes they're on separate machines. The thing that's nice about you having your own server is you can really play around and update versions and try different things, and you really can't mess it up. So it's a virtual machine, worst case scenario. I'll just have to restore it from a week ago. Okay, so I noticed that I do actually have a typo in here, and it's on everybody's machine. That's duplicated, so you don't need to run that again. Everything's actually been installed from up here. So then the next thing we need to do is we need to add the database drivers. Okay, so PHP is a server-side language. MySQL is a database. We need to install PHP 5-MySQL, which are going to be all of the database drivers the server needs to basically bridge these two things. It's going to make my PHP able to talk to my MySQL and back and forth. So I'm just going to hit my up arrow, and then I'm going to type in PHP 5-MySQL and hit enter. So it's going to install basically all the ODBC and all the different drivers that are needed. Okay, so at this point, we really have a server up and going with all of the stuff that we've typed in so far. We've got a web server, we've got PHP, we've got a database server, and our web server is able to bridge over to our database server. But what we need to do is we need to be able to connect to this machine remotely. Now, some websites use FTP, file transfer protocol. So basically, if we take a look at our virtual machines over here, you have two of them. You've got a PHP developer and a PHP web server. We're configuring the web server right now, but the developer is going to be where we're going to install our tools. There's different tools. Some people use Dreamweaver, some people use Aptana, some people use PHP Storm. There's a lot of options for development tools. We can install those development tools over here and connect up to our web server. We're not going to install those tools directly on our web server. Our web server is going to be Linux. Our developer server will be a Windows machine, Windows 7, so that way we can get that up and going, install Windows tools that'll just talk to a remote web server. And that would be the way it would normally go. So in order to do that, we need to create something to make that connection happen. So we're actually going to use something called SFTP, which is secured FTP. It's a much more secure way of transferring information back and forth. Now, the world is in love with FTP, specifically web developers, and it's a horrible protocol that we really shouldn't be using at this point, because every time you make an FTP connection, you're throwing your username and your password over the wire in plain text, and anybody can intercept those and see those, and that's something we don't want to do. So some web servers only support FTP. It's starting to get better, but what we're going to do is we're going to install OpenSSH, and we're going to create an SFTP service, so that way we can get this all working. So we're going to install OpenSSH server. So I'm going to hit my up arrow. It's going to be install OpenSSH-server. And then I'm going to hit enter. Say yes. So SSH is Secure Shell is what that stands for. It's something that's actually been used for a long time in the Linux world. It's something that Windows doesn't really have an equivalent to. Basically, on Linux, a lot of things get done through the terminal, like what we're doing right now. That's very common. And what you can do is, from home, you can SSH into work, and you can run commands on a terminal on your home machine that's actually executing on a remote server. So that's what SSH is. But it's a good way to create a connection between a client and a server, and that's what's being used with SFTP. Okay, so the next thing, I debated if I wanted to do this, and I decided to do it. We're going to back up the SSH configuration, because there is a probability you're going to mistype something and somehow really mess this thing up. So what we're going to do is we're going to copy the SSH config file to basically SSH config back. So that way you can always restore it if you need to. So what you can do is we can open this, we could just copy it. So it's sudo, super user. CP is to copy. That's just the command to copy things. And then this is the directory it's in. It's etc SSH. And then the file is called sshd_config. It doesn't have an extension. Extensions aren't as required as they are in Windows. But basically what we can do is we can select this line. It actually wrapped. If I pull it this way, you can see it's one line. And I can right click on that and do a copy. And then if I come over here to the terminal and I right click on that terminal, I can do a paste. That way we don't have to type this whole thing out. If I hit enter, it doesn't give us any feedback, but it was done. It would give us an error message if it wasn't done correctly. So we basically copied this line, we ran it. So now what we want to do is we want to create a group called SFTP only. That's going to be a group that's going to hold our SFTP users. So I'm going to copy this. Now really, we're only going to have one user, but I'm trying to show you how to do it the right way. So I'm going to paste this in here. So sudo, and then group add is the command that you can create a group, and a group is like a folder, and a group can hold multiple users. So our group name is going to be SFTP only. I'm going to hit enter, and then we're going to add a user. The user is going to be called dev user. So I'm going to copy this. I'm using a control C at this point. Over here I can't do a control V. I do have to right click and then do a paste. So the user that we're creating is going to be dev user, like developer user. So the command is add, or user add. I'm going to hit enter. So it created our user for us, but we didn't create a password for it. So now we're going to use the passwd to create that password. So I'm going to highlight this. I'm going to copy it. Come over here. I'm going to paste it. So sudo passwd dev user. I'm going to hit enter. Now we're going to enter in a new password. Now the password is going to be dev123. So our database and our user is going to have the same password, just so that way we don't get confused later. dev123. Now I'm typing and you don't see it moving. That's just a Linux thing, and what it's doing is it's preventing, in case somebody's standing over your shoulder, they can't see the length of the password. dev123. Enter. So now we have a user created. Now we need to get the user in the group. So the user's created, but what we need to do is we gotta do a user mod, and we're going to add the user. It has to be a lowercase a, and we're going to add it to a group, which is a capital G, and the group is going to be SFTP only, and then it's going to pass in that dev user. So it's probably best to copy this and then paste it over here. So then I'm going to hit enter. Yeah, so Linux is case sensitive, and a lowercase a could mean something completely different than a capitalized A. So, okay, so now what we're going to do is we're going to use a tool called gedit, and that's actually what we're in right now. It's just a text editor. So I'm going to highlight this line, and basically we're going to use a text editor like Notepad, and we're going to modify the SSHD config. Just so you know, D stands for the daemon, and the daemon is basically like a service. That's all that is. So SSHD underscore config. So I'm going to copy this. Oop, don't paste. I'm going to paste it in here and hit enter. So now it's opening up our config file. So now we've got basically two text editors open. And what we need to do is we need to scroll all the way to the bottom of our config file, and we need to add this. And basically what we're doing is we're matching a group called SFTP only, which is our group. We could have actually did something called match user and then used that dev user, but this is the way we're doing it. It's important that we're going into the var www. You have to make sure that is going to be the path that it goes into. So as soon as we SFTP in, it'll automatically dump us in there. So I'm just going to copy this, and then I'm going to go over to the config file, and I'm going to grab my little scroll bar. I'm going to scroll all the way to the bottom. I see use PAM, yes. I'm going to go enter, enter. I'm going to go up an arrow. I'm going to paste by doing a control V. Didn't mean to do that. I must have not did a control V. Oh, I must have. It's there. All right, I'm not exactly sure what I did. Okay, so anyways, I've got match, group, SFTP only. Everything's in there the way it's supposed to be. So then at this point, I'm going to go File. I'm going to go Save. And then I'm going to go File. And I'm going to go Quit. I'm going to pull this up. Then the next thing I need to do is I need to make the HTML folder inside the www folder have read, write, execute permissions for us, so that way we can upload and create folders and do everything we need to do. So I'm going to copy this, and then I'm just going to paste that right in here. So again, sudo, and then chmod is where we're going to modify permissions, and this is just the way that it's done. You know, typically it's 777 for full, 775 is read write, 644. I don't know. To be honest, I don't fully get all of it. I know 777 is full on. You can do everything. 775 is doing pretty much everything except for executing. So I'm gonna run that. If you're interested, it's definitely something you can do more research on. I know the bare minimum of chmodding. Okay, so then what I want to do is I want to restart this SSH service. So I'm going to copy this. Otherwise, if you're good at typing it really quickly, you can do that. I'm going to paste it. So service is the application that manages all of the services, and we're passing in which server, or I'm sorry, which service we want to either stop, start, or restart. We're just going to restart it. So the service will automatically start up when the machine starts up. So at this point, we have a full-blown FTP, SFTP server running both a web server and PHP and MySQL. So this is going to be everything we're going to need for the semester. So at this point, I can just close this down, and then we're good to go. Now, we will need the IP address of the machine. On the Windows machine, if you click on it and then you go to your summary tab, you can find it in here. Here it is, IP address. So mine is 10.4.132.57. So that's going to be my IP address. Now, if I shut the machine down, from my developer machine, I will not be able to connect to it. That's just, you have to have the machine up and going, and you have to know the correct IP address. So the thing that is difficult is, like, if we shut the machine down and then tomorrow or even an hour or two turn it back on, we may get a different IP address. It may hold the same IP address, but we may get a different one. So you're always going to want to turn this machine on, this powered on, and get its IP address. Really, you probably don't ever have to remote desktop on it again if you don't want to. But for right now, we've got it up and going, and we've got an IP address. The other way you can do it is, if I go back to the machine, in Windows, they have the IP config, and that gives you your IP address. On Linux, it's ifconfig. So the ifconfig is the same as IP config. And then you can see that it'll give your address right here. So anyways, hopefully you found this video helpful and you've got a server set up.